All right, we are sitting in my native pollinator garden. So this area of the yard is completely devoted to native plants, specifically focused on pollinators. Although I do try to have native plants throughout my yard, and I'm open to mixing things up. But there are 3 ways that you can get native plants. The first one, most of these actually came from the Utah Pollinator Program. And it's a totally free program where you apply in the spring and you get plants in the fall. And it's just to help, it's an initiative to help people plant more pollinator plants. And I have seen tons of different kinds of bees in this garden. So this garden's about a year old since I planted it, and there's lots of things coming up that are really pretty. The second place is just from a nursery or garden center, and sometimes it's really hard to find native plants at nursery and garden centers. Not because they don't have them, but because they don't necessarily label them as natives. These ones I picked up from Provo. It's called Utah Native Plants, and it's just a nursery that's totally devoted for natives, and the owner just runs it out of her backyard. But it's really great because she makes sure everything that's offered is native. So I bought these from her, and I'm going to plant these up and fill in some areas here that need to have more plants. And the third place that you can find native plants is simply by watching in your own garden. I definitely have had native plants come in and reseed and pop up on their own. Things like rabbit brush and yarrow and asters, they've all come in. And if you're watching for them, I usually find you can find your own native plants in your own yard. All right, this is my lawn and it looks pretty crummy. This is just an example of something, there's not one thing I did wrong. There was multiple problems that resulted in this lovely patchy lawn. So we've had problems ever since we brought in sod 3 years ago, and that first summer we've had problems. It was supposed to be a drought tolerant sod, and there are elements of that, but a lot of it was filled with annual bluegrass. So a lot of our problems started with annual bluegrass dies off and doesn't do well when it's hot and it doesn't get a lot of water. And we also have very sandy soils here, so the sandy soils make it so there's even less water and you have to water more frequently, and if you don't, it dries out very quickly, and hence a lot of our grass dried out. But that's not the only problem that happened. There was also sod webworms. There was low fertility in the soil, which often happens with sandy soil as well. So a whole bunch of problems going on, and what we've been trying to do is fix those problems so we can get some nice lawn. So we added some more compost into the soil and aerated. We also treated for the sod webworms, and I've actually, it's so bare right now because I wanted all that annual bluegrass to die off. So now I can overseed it with a better grass that'll withstand the drought and the sandy conditions of the soil better. And I've also increased the fertility with just some general lawn fertilizers. And if you look over there, it doesn't look that bad. So I did overseed in the spring, and I don't think I did it heavy enough, and I hadn't really got my fertility of my soil up. But there was more fertilizer going on in the middle of the lawn, so that looks a lot better. And a lot of the overseeding that I did has started to grow in and fill in. So now we just got to get the rest of the lawn looking better. It takes a while. One of the problems with fixing a problem like this is if you try in the spring and it doesn't quite work, you can't try again until the fall. So you have to iterate, but then you have to iterate, and it takes sometimes years to figure out all the problems that are going on and then fix it. And in the meantime, you just get really patchy grass. This landscape design was pretty straightforward, but the hardest part was to add more off-street parking. So we've got our driveway right here. Now bordering this driveway, coming clear down here, is a retaining wall, and there's probably a good 3 to 4 feet grade difference right here between the top of the retaining wall and down here. So you can't just, the normal thing would just be usually you extend the driveway over that way, but that's very cost prohibitive and labor intensive because you have to redo all the retaining wall system in that way. They did have an idea of doing like a circular driveway. We have a lot of the same problems. This is sloped down this way. We have quite a significant slope, and we also have a lot of trees in that area. It would kind of prevent that from being a good option. So my suggestion is to simply move the driveway this way. So you have room for another parking spot right here. Garage. You can get another car off the street and parked on the driveway, which works really well. The client was really concerned how this would look. It's not normal to move our driveway over. So one thing we're going to make sure and do, we're going to add a pathway going towards the front, and we're going to, this area is going to mirror this existing shrub bed that we're going to take out. And then we're also going to, this whole front yard, we're getting rid of all of the lawn and adding pathways and such. So it's gonna, visually, I think it'll look fine. Here's a before picture of the house, and here's what it looks after. And here's the final landscape design. I watched a video from Veritasium about Roundup. I'll link it in the description. I'm out here in my garage, and in my garage I have a bunch of chemicals. Here they all are. In an ideal world, I wouldn't have any chemicals. I wouldn't use any of these, but we don't live in an ideal world, and there are problems. And there are trade-offs for using chemicals or not. This one is what I started talking about. This is off-brand glyphosate. So this is a weed killer, and I use it to control noxious weeds that I can't control easily any other ways. I use it with other methods to reduce the amount of chemicals I need to use, but I find that sometimes there's just really bad weeds, and the only way I can get rid of them is using Roundup. Well, that used to be Roundup. Roundup, here's another trade-off. This is the old Roundup. It has glyphosate in it. If you buy a new product with the Roundup label, it won't have glyphosate. It'll have a mix of chemicals that most people say are worse for the environment and worse for our health than the old glyphosate that used to be in Roundup. So there's another trade-off. For a trade-off, you might need to treat for a disease that would kill a high-value plant, and that's something you have to look at. When you're thinking of chemicals, they're not always bad to use. You have to consider the trade-offs, and you have to make a good decision about the best course of action you can take. And sometimes that does mean that you might use a little bit of chemical use. That's okay.